From lighthearted takes on faith to thoughtful stories about spiritual journeys, these moments offer both laughs and gentle insights perfect for winding down and drifting off into a peaceful night's rest. When Theo Von sat down with Mike Duncan, the conversation eventually drifted toward one of Mike's specialties, history, and specifically the religion of the ancient Romans. What began as a casual discussion soon turned into a layered look at how deeply intertwined spirituality was with nearly every part of Roman life. Mike began by painting a picture of just how central religion was to Roman society. For the Romans, faith wasn't something separate from daily existence. It was woven into the very fabric of their politics, family life, and cultural identity. Their worldview was built on the idea that gods were ever present, watching over human affairs, and that prosperity and safety of the state depended on maintaining a good relationship with them. One of the most important ways they kept that relationship alive was through sacrifice. These weren't always grand, dramatic offerings, though those did happen, but rather a constant rhythm of rituals. Livestock, food, incense, and wine were regularly offered to the gods in acts meant to express gratitude, seek favor, or avert misfortune. Every festival, public event, and major decisions were surrounded by ceremonial gestures meant to show respect to divine powers.
And what was Romulus? Romulus was a warrior above all. And this is actually like what the Romans are above all. They are the children of Mars. They do war. They're really good at it. That's why they conquer the entire Mediterranean world. They're better at it than just about anybody else.
So it's a very masculine society?
Oh yeah. I mean, it's the patriarchy like to the max. And they were very martial society, and they're sort of
martial
society, and like their political institutions are mirroring their military institutions, and the consul and their leaders are simultaneously, they're the political leader, but also the leader of the armed forces. This is actually what their job is.
Wow.
The other role of the consul, however,
the consul,
right, which is one of the key leaders in the Republican era, is overseeing these critical sacrifices and critical rituals that the Romans felt that they had to perform and needed to do in order to stay on the right side of the gods. And that was the job of the political leadership, was to defend the city using the armies and to make sure that the gods were happy by making the proper sacrifices. And so the second king of Rome.
Mike explained that these sacrifices weren't simply about superstition. They reflected a sense of duty and service. In the Roman mind, the gods provided blessings, protection, and guidance, and in return, humans had an obligation to honor them with offerings. This relationship was at the heart of Roman stability, both personal and political. Leaders and common citizens alike believed that neglecting the gods could invite disaster, whether in the form of poor harvest, military defeats, or political turmoil. Throughout the interview, Theo looked intrigued by how practical and structured this belief system seemed. The Romans weren't just praying for personal salvation, they were working to maintain cosmic order. The rituals were almost contractual in nature, humans keeping up their side of an agreement with the divine. From there, the conversation shifted toward the surprising ways in which Roman religion and Roman military culture mirrored each other. The gods themselves were warriors, mostly borrowed from the legendary Greek gods, Jupiter, Mars, Minerva. They were central to the conquest that Rome accomplished, at least to them. Before battles, soldiers took part in ceremonies designed to secure the favor of the gods. Sacred chickens were observed for omens, sacrifices were made, and commanders often invoked divine protection over their troops. In many ways, the discipline and hierarchy of the military reflected the discipline and hierarchy of Roman religion. Just as priests oversaw rituals and ensured they were performed correctly, officers enforced strict codes of conduct and battle formations. Both spheres valued precision, obedience, and respect for authority. Just as an improperly conducted ritual could be seen as an insult to the gods, a disorganized military maneuver could be seen as an insult to the honor of Rome.
And when we talk about them being a religious people, this is sort of pagan polytheistic religion, and so there were different gods, right? And we know these gods. A lot of them were borrowed from the Greeks. So it's Jupiter is Zeus, and there's Minerva, and there's Bacchus, and all of these different gods that are out there. So they didn't have religion in the sense of like there was one thing that everybody did and was a part of, and everybody went to church on Sundays. There were different temples in different places, and like one city their patron would be Apollo, another city their patron would be Diana, right? And so it would change from time to place, and so they had this very open-mindedness towards religion and how you practiced.
Mike also highlighted how this connection could be both inspiring and dangerous. On one hand, it bound Roman society together, giving people a reason to endure hardship and strive for collective success. On the other hand, it meant that wars could always be justified as divine will, making them harder to question. Religion sanctified military expansion, and military victories reinforced religious belief, a cycle that kept Rome on its path of conquest for centuries. When Theo Von sat down with Neil deGrasse Tyson, their conversation went into the mythological territory that was in equal parts speculative, mysterious, and rooted in deep questions about humanity's place in the cosmos. They touched on the concept of the so-called dark arts, not in the sense of fantasy fiction, but as a way of describing the realms of knowledge and phenomena that remain hidden, unexplained, or even deliberately obscured from the public. This naturally flowed into the topic of extraterrestrial life, an area where mystery and speculation have persisted for decades. Theo, with his trademark mix of humor and curiosity, pressed Neil on what might happen if humans finally encountered intelligent life beyond Earth. His question wasn't just about the fact of alien existence, but about the reaction, the sheer, unpredictable ripple it would cause through our social, cultural, and political systems. This was where Neil's perspective took a surprising turn. Rather than centering the conversation on political leaders, religious figures, or even the military, the typical institutions people imagined leading such an encounter, he stressed that scientists would be the ones best suited to handle first contact.
What you want to be true rather than what is true.
I took one class out in Arizona at pretty high altitude.
You know what they say? That if you learn something under certain psychomotor conditions, that you recover it better under those same conditions.
Oh, wow.
Like if you get high and you learn something, if you get high again later, you remember that better because you match the mental states.
Oh, say aliens show up, right? Is there a society or culture or ethnicity that's best evolved, you think, to handle it?
Scientists.
Really?
Scientists. If an alien came here, go ahead, Theo. If an alien landed right in front of us and said to you, Theo, take me to your leader, are you going to take him to the White House?
No.
No, of course not. Are you going to take him to Congress? No.
That's a great question.
That's my point. You would take him to, well, I'm not going to speak for you, but I happen to be a scientist. But if I were not a scientist, I would take him to a scientist.
You would?
Yes. A biologist or a physicist. Somebody who's, by the way.
Say scientists closed that day.
Come back.
The reasoning behind this wasn't rooted in ego or professional pride. From Neil's perspective, science is humanity's only truly universal language, the closest thing to a shared code that could transcend cultural, linguistics, and even planetary boundaries. While political leaders might approach aliens with a lens of negotiation, and religious leaders might interpret their arrival through the lens of doctrine or prophecy, scientists would approach it with the tools of observation, measurement, and evidence. The goal wouldn't be to dominate or convert, but to understand. Theo found this point interesting because it reframed the entire hypothetical in practical terms. Instead of envisioning a dramatic world stage moment where presidents and popes addressed an alien delegation, Neil painted a picture of careful analysis, patient communication attempts, and the slow construction of a shared understanding. It was less about spectacle and more about building a bridge that could actually hold the weight of interspecies communication. The discussion also explored the psychological dimension of such a discovery. The human species has been shaped by a long history of believing itself to be unique, not just in intelligence, but in moral and spiritual standing. Encountering a civilization with technological centuries or millennia ahead of ours would force a massive recalibration of that self-image. Neil pointed out that scientific inquiry, by its very nature, is comfortable with being proven wrong or having to update its models of reality. Political and religious structures, on the other hand, are often built on fixed principles or narratives, which could make adaptation to such a paradigm shift far more difficult. They also touched on the concept of the dark arts, again in this context, not magic, but the unknown forces and knowledge that lie beyond current human understanding. Extraterrestrial beings would almost certainly possess knowledge in this category from our perspective. Their technology, communication systems, and possibly even with their perception of reality could seem like supernatural feats to us. The danger, as Neil noted, would be approaching such beings with fear or superstition rather than curiosity. Theo added his own reflection on how people in different parts of the world might interpret alien contact. Some might see it as a sign of divine intervention, others as a threat, and still others as a natural step in the evolution of the human story. The diversity of reactions could create both unity and division on a scale the world has ever seen. Neil's emphasis on scientists handling the situation was not about excluding others, but about ensuring that first contact would be approached with rationality and openness rather than suspicion or hostility. It wasn't hard to imagine that the first moments of communication could be incredibly fragile. A misunderstanding could lead to disaster, while a careful, evidence-based approach could open the door to cooperation and mutual learning. The amazing next conversation between Theo Von and his guest quickly turned into a deep, almost ethereal exploration of the afterlife, the unseen realm that has fascinated humankind for centuries. They began by touching on a curious and compelling observation. People from vastly different cultures, backgrounds, and belief systems often describe their near-death or afterlife experiences in strikingly similar ways. Whether it's someone from a small village on the other side of the world or a city dweller from the modern age, the narratives share core elements: an overwhelming sense of peace, a vivid perception of light, and a love so profound that it transcends anything found in physical existence.
The afterlife described in near-death experiences, one of the most consistent themes, amazingly, is they do feel that, and they use a stronger word, the connection, much more commonly, saying it's a unity, it's a oneness of us and of everyone. It's sort of like the super, if you will, ultra love is what our destiny is going to be in the afterlife.
Oh, yeah.
For example, we had from Canada, we had a bad car accident, and a gentleman was driving with his fiancée. Boom, he fell asleep and hit a tree. Mm-hmm. Both him and his fiancée had that out-of-body experience, holding hands. I mean, they were fiancés.
Oh, yeah, sweet.
Rose up, and then they were able to see this unearthly, beautiful realm in the distance. There were 4 beings that came up to them. 2 of them went to her, 2 of them went to him, and they separated. They're holding hands. They felt so much peace and love, they described. He wanted to say no, but felt so compellingly. That's why it was remarkable that he felt so much peace and love that he didn't want to resist it. And so he watched the 2 beings carry his fiancée toward this beautiful, unearthly realm in the distance. The other 2 beings gently lowered him back down to the car. From way above the car, he saw the front end on fire. And then he went back into his body, and he felt, when he returned to consciousness, his fiancée leaning on his shoulder as she was when he had the accident. And he knew immediately fiancée was dead. She was an empty shell, and that he had left her with those beings above. That's a shared near-death experience.
Really?
And very dramatic. Shared near-death experiences are...
So that's unbelievable.
I mean, out of 4,000, to have maybe about 20. That's how rare they are. And yet they're so dramatic in terms of providing evidence that for those that permanently, irreversibly die, their consciousness continues to live and will eventually be reunited.
From there, they began to explore why these accounts, despite their variety, they seem to harmonize around certain central themes. One of the key ideas was that the afterlife appears to be completely non-physical. It's not bound by the mechanics of the body, the constraints of time, or the limitations of sensory perception as we know them. Instead, communication in that space happens in a way that can't be fully translated into earthly language. Thoughts, emotions, and understanding seems to merge into a seamless form of connection. In this place, there's no need for words, no misunderstandings, and no barriers between one being and another. It is, in essence, an exchange of pure awareness. A large part of their discussion revolved around love, not the human version of love that is tied to conditions, emotions, or circumstances, but an unconditional, all-encompassing force. People who have been in that realm often describe it as being bathed in a love that is so complete, so entirely accepting, that it's difficult to put into words without diminishing its impact. This love doesn't just feel personal, it feels like the foundation of the entire reality in that realm. It's this love that makes many who have had near-death experiences reluctant to return to the physical world. Here on Earth, life is a mix of joy and hardship, connection and isolation. There, the love is constant, unwavering, and infinite. The guest then shared an extraordinary account of a shared near-death experience, something even more intriguing than the usual individual accounts. In this story, two people undergoing a life-threatening situation seem to have entered that other realm at the same time. What made this so astonishing was that both individuals described identical events afterward, without having communicated during the experience itself. They spoke of perceiving one another in a space filled with indescribable light, communicating without speech, and feeling entirely free of fear or pain. Both later confirmed the same sensation, the same imagery, and the same overwhelming sense of being welcomed by something far greater than themselves.
Try this new thing, that's interesting. What else?
It's interesting. What's interesting, Theo, is that when they're in that realm, when they're in that beautiful, unearthly realm, feeling love and peace beyond anything they knew on their earthly life, that's not unfamiliar. They often say this is a strong sense of their real home and not their earthly life. And that's one reason they want to stay there. They know their friends, family, and loved ones that they leave behind are going to be okay, that they too will be in that realm when their time comes.
It's that feeling you get too when you hug somebody that you love, I think.
I like that. I like that a lot. And exactly.
That feeling, it's not even about you're happy that it's them,
Yeah.
But it's really not even there's a little bit of sometimes in a moment in a hug where it's not even about them. It's just about this other little space that gets created kind of that just feels absolutely welcoming.
Theo and his guest reflected on how such stories, especially when shared by more than one witness, challenge the idea that these experiences are simply products of the brain under stress. If two people can experience and remember the same non-physical events, it opens the possibility that consciousness exists independently of the body. It raises the question of whether life and death are simply transitions between different states of being, rather than the absolute beginning and end that we often imagine. The conversation also delved into how these encounters often transform people. Those who have experienced the afterlife frequently return with a newfound sense of purpose and a profound shift in priorities. Material pursuits, petty conflicts, and fear of death often lose their grip. Instead, they become more focused on kindness, connection, and living in alignment with deeper truths. They carry a quiet confidence, as if they've glimpsed something unshakable and eternal, and this changes how they interact with the world. By the end, it was clear that their discussion was about far more than curiosity or speculation. It was about how these experiences might point to a greater reality that underpins our own. Whether seen through the lens of spirituality, philosophy, or even science, the consistent patterns and transformative effects of near-death experiences suggests that the afterlife, whatever it truly is, may be less about endings and more about returning to a source we've always belonged to. What would you do during the apocalypse? When Theo Von brought up the topic of the apocalypse during this time on Joe Rogan's podcast, the conversation quickly turned into one of those hypothetical survival scenarios that's equal parts serious planning and comedic exploration. It started with musings about what the end might actually look like, whether it would be an asteroid impact, a global war, a viral pandemic, or even the collapse of societal infrastructure. The idea was both fascinating and unsettling, and soon enough, the question wasn't so much about if, but how someone might prepare for such a day. Naturally, the talk shifted toward the most iconic survivalist measures, bunkers and firearms. The concept of a bunker had a certain allure to it, not just because it provided protection from immediate threats, but because it symbolized a kind of control in the middle of chaos. A bunker could be stocked with food, water, medicine, and tools, creating a small pocket of stability in an unstable world. It wasn't just about hiding underground. It was about having a place to maintain some semblance of normalcy, while everything above ground descended into disorder.
Voice box in it. It's like, this is it.
This is the apocalypse.
You're leaving work. This is it.
I guess you have to respond to each individual situation. It's like each thing will be unique. Like, is someone trying to break in your house? Is someone trying to rob your, someone trying to break in your car while you're driving?
Okay,
like,
so you have an hour. You have kind of an hour.
Right.
We'll give you 90 minutes. You have 90 minutes to kind of get before you're going to start to feel some pressure.
What do you do?
I don't know.
I guess load up some magazines.
Oh, I'm fucked. But I'm wondering, what do you do?
That's what I would do. I'd probably load up some magazines.
Okay. Into what?
Into guns.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, see, I don't know if you fucking...
No,
at the periodical
I don't mean
section.
magazines like Sports Illustrated.
I'm like, dang,
I mean like
crazy.
an AR.
This guy's taking information with him into a bunker.
I'm reading Time magazine.
Yeah, dude. I'm like, I just see Joe with as many copies of Field and Stream as you can fucking live.
Well, you could use those magazines as like protection. You stack enough of them on top of each other.
Okay, see, now you're thinking.
They'll slow bullets down.
Okay, but say like you pick up your family or something. Do you guys stay? Do you have a bunker?
I don't currently, but this conversation is making me want a bunker.
Yeah.
I've wanted a ranch for that very reason. Like, if shit goes completely sideways, it would be great if there was a place with water and...
From this point, the conversation dug into the practicalities of outfitting such a place. This wasn't a simple matter of throwing some canned beans and a flashlight into a basement. A real survival bunker would require a detailed plan, air filtration systems in case of chemical contamination, renewable energy sources like solar panels or pedal-powered generators, and maybe even hydroponic setups to grow fresh food if the surface remained inhospitable for a long period. They acknowledged how such preparation could be a blend of engineering, lots of resource management, and a good grip on psychological endurance. Then came the topic of firearms. In a post-apocalyptic scenario, the rules of society might not apply anymore, and personal protection would become a matter of life and death. They talked about the idea that firearms wouldn't be just tools for defense against people with bad intentions, but also for hunting if conventional food sources dried up. Interestingly, the discussion didn't stay purely in the territory of logistics. It began to explore the psychology of preparing for such an extreme event. On one hand, there was the undeniable appeal of being ready, having the ability to protect oneself and loved ones, to feel like you weren't at the mercy of the world's unpredictability. On the other hand, there was the acknowledgement that spending too much time thinking about the end of the world could make a person overly paranoid or disconnected from the present. Preparation needed to be balanced with living a fulfilling life right now. When Theo Von sat down with Kat Von D, the conversation naturally drifted into the shadowy and intriguing world of Goth culture. Theo, curious as always, wanted to know how Kat first became drawn to that lifestyle. Kat shared that her journey into the Goth world wasn't a sudden leap, but more of a gradual unfolding, a search for identity and belonging that began in childhood. She explained that even within her own family unit, she often felt a kind of separation, an invisible distance that made her feel out of step with the people closest to her.
Fascination with like goth people that are like in trees. I've never felt the feeling calling, but I don't know. There's a lot of them. Yeah,
that's cool.
It's a thing. So go on.
There it is, goths and trees right there. Let's look at a few of them.
All hang out. I mean, that guy's not that goth.
Yeah, that guy definitely.
Oh,
that guy is goth, dude.
Yeah, and they all hang out in trees. I don't understand.
Ooh, there is something very Edgar Allan Poe about it. You know?
Because of a raven?
I think so. Now this lady seems like
it's a thing. I've never done it.
Let's see more. This is fascinating. Wow.
I know. That's
now
what
that
I'm
guy
saying.
is goth. Yeah.
Look, they're inside trees. It's weird.
I wonder if there's something about it that feels good to him.
To our species.
Yeah, I could see it. Now this is really interesting.
She brought props.
Oh yeah, she's a Sith.
Or scythe, or
Is it scythe? She's a scythe. Oh wow, yeah, these are goths on
in trees. Is it a tree house or?
Yeah, it looks like a tree house or a zip line. Goths on zip line would be good too.
This sense of disconnection, rather than closing her off from the world, drove her to search for a space where she could be fully herself. She first found that connection through music, dark, emotionally charged, and often theatrical. The lyrics, the tone, and even imagery gave her a language for feelings she's always carried but couldn't quite express. From there, her involvement naturally extended to communities of like-minded people, those who not only embraced the aesthetic, but also shared a deeper philosophy about individuality, self-expression, and the beauty in the macabre. Theo found the idea fascinating, especially the way subcultures like goth often provide a home for people who feel displaced in conventional environments. The conversation moved into lighter territory when the subject of tree goths came up, a playful but strangely real niche within the goth scene. Kat described this as a kind of woodland, nature-infused take on the otherwise urban-heavy goth aesthetic. Instead of the usual industrial backdrops or dimly lit clubs, tree goths incorporate natural environments into their style and gatherings. Think moss-covered boots, forest rituals, and photo shoots in misty groves. Theo was amused by the imagery, imagining shadowy figures in black lace perched in oak trees, sipping herbal tea under moonlight. But as the discussion unfolded, it became clear there was more to it than just an aesthetic quirk. Tree goths often represent a blending of the goth sensibility, its focus on the mystical, the spiritual, and the existential, with a reverence for the natural world. In a way, it's about merging darkness with life, finding beauty in the untamed and the overgrown.
And then they just like take it to the, to the outward expression of that. But I don't know. I just like it. I've always
Maybe that's it. Maybe like a way to be seen too, because I guess it was an outlier. Like I grew up in a small town, so.
But it's kind of not, because like.
Right, because you have your own group then. Like, is that what you mean?
Well, I mean, I don't know.
I'm not judging. I'm just.
Kat spoke about how the goth world is far more diverse than most people assume. Some goths are drawn purely by the music, others by fashion, and still others by philosophical or spiritual aspects. For her, it's always been about the deeper connection, a lens through which to view life's complexities, contradictions, and inevitable mortality. The aesthetics is a reflection of that inner worldview rather than the other way around. Theo connected to this on how all humans are, in some way, seeking a tribe, whether it's through religion, hobbies, careers, or alternative lifestyles. People gravitate toward groups where they feel they can shed the masks they wear in everyday society. The goth subculture for Kat offered not only the sense of belonging, but also a creative outlet that merged music, art, and personal identity into a seamless whole. By the end of the conversation, what began as a chat about fashion and lifestyle had evolved into a reflection on human nature, how people adapt when they feel out of place, and how they often turn their perceived differences into a source of strength. The goth life, as Kat described it, wasn't about wallowing in darkness, but about embracing all parts of existence, light and dark, joy and melancholy, and finding beauty in the places where others might only see gloom. Theo Von and his guest began reflecting on something that has been evident throughout human history, but seems especially visible in the modern world: the relentless search for truth. They talked about how people, no matter where they're from or what they believe, seem to be on a journey to find something that feels real, something that makes sense of life's complexities. Theo described this as a kind of hunger that runs deeper than material needs or even emotional fulfillment. For many, the usual pursuits, career success, money, relationships, entertainment, offer moments of excitement or satisfaction, but they rarely last. After the novelty fades, there's an emptiness that lingers, an itch that nothing seems to scratch. That gap, he suggests, is what drives so many people to look beyond themselves and beyond the physical world, searching for something greater.
Journey go to, like, I don't know if I want to call it a journey, but like what role has religion like played in your life and stuff? Because I think we're at a time in the world, I think we're always at a time in the world, but I think it feels like a lot of people are looking for something that makes sense more. I feel like we're getting exhausted by the truth that a lot of the things that we feel like will make us feel good aren't doing it, I feel like that a lot of times. But what has some of that experience been like? I mean, if you got baptized, what kind of
His guest agreed, adding that this human hunger often pushes people toward spirituality or religion. It isn't always a straight path. Some explore philosophy, others dive into science or creative expression. But at the core is the same question: what is true, and how do I live in alignment with it? For some, the search leads to belief in a higher power, a force that shapes existence and gives life meaning. From there, the discussion naturally turned toward religious practices that serve as entry points into this deeper connection. Baptism came up as one of the most profound and symbolic of these practices. Theo spoke about it not just as a ritual, but as a deeply personal act that can mark a turning point in a person's spiritual journey. They explored how baptism is often seen as both a public declaration and a private transformation. On the surface, it's a simple act, being submerged in water or having water poured over the head. But symbolically, it represents something much larger: the cleansing of the past, the washing away of spiritual weight, and the emergence into a new life aligned with faith.
Like, how do you get, because I think a lot of people are lost. I feel lost a lot of times, I think a lot of us feel that way. And so how do you feel like you solved, like, you're lost?
Well, I mean,
or is that even a fair question? I don't know.
Yeah, I know. I get what you're saying. I was brought up with Christianity in my childhood, and then I strayed. And so, like, in a nutshell, I just kind of in the last 5 years have like made my way back and have a different understanding than maybe when I was a kid. Because I think when you're a kid, you're like, or at least for me, it was like we just go to church because that's what we have to do. And I didn't have actual profound questions that I want answered like I do now. And so I think as an adult, you get to have a different understanding.
Theo pointed out that for many, baptism is more than tradition. It's a moment when belief becomes tangible. It's the point where faith moves from being an idea to being embodied in action. It can be a deeply emotional experience, not because the water itself has any special power, but because of what it signifies: a deliberate step toward a relationship with a higher life form, a surrender of the self to something greater. His guests expanded on this, noting that baptism can also serve as a bridge between the personal and the communal. While it's a deeply individual decision, it's usually witnessed and celebrated by a community of believers. That shared moment creates a sense of belonging, a feeling that one is now part of a larger spiritual family. For many people, that sense of being connected to something bigger than themselves is exactly what they've been searching for in their quest for truth. Theo seemed particularly struck by how baptism, in its simplicity, covers so much of what people are seeking. In a world filled with noise, distraction, and endless complexity, this ancient practice offers something clear and grounding. It's an act rooted in humility, acknowledging that we can't find all the answers on our own, and that there's value in placing trust in a higher source of life and wisdom. They also discussed how the meaning of baptism can differ from person to person. For some, it marks the culmination of a long spiritual search. For others, it's the beginning of a new one. And in some cases, it can reignite faith in those who had drifted away, serving as a reminder of a truth they once embraced. By the end of the discussion, it was clear that both Theo and his guest saw baptism not just as a religious formality, but as a deeply resonant expression of humanity's ongoing search for truth. It represents a willingness to step into the unknown with faith, to accept that there is more to life than what we can see and measure. And for those who take that step, it often becomes one of the most meaningful experiences of their lives. The conversation wrapped up with a shared recognition that this search for truth, whether it leads to baptism, another spiritual path, or a different form of awakening altogether, is one of the defining features of being human. The episode with Duncan Trussell unfolded into that strange and wonderful conversation between him and Theo Von, often drifting between comedy, philosophy, and personal reflection, sometimes in the same sentence. But on this particular day, the talk took a slower, more intentional turn when the topic of meditation came up. Theo had always been curious about meditation, though perhaps not entirely convinced of its power. To him, it was one of those practices people talked about in glowing terms, emptying the mind, finding peace, becoming centered, but it seemed almost too abstract to fully grasp. That began to change as Duncan started explaining it in his own vivid, thoughtful way.
You're like remembering just with just perfect clarity what it looked like when that withered old man went into the air, his cane spinning off into the grass, his body tumbling down into the ditch fire.
Yeah.
And you might want to like stop and write it down because it's like, fuck, I never realized he had a little mouse in his pocket.
Right.
Why did he have a mouse? He had a pet mouse. Did the mouse... No.
You're going to be a circus mouse.
You go thinking.
Right.
And then you go back to the breath. And you do that for 10 minutes. And it sounds so absolutely ridiculous, but many people have not stopped
Thinking.
moving. They're always doing something.
Yeah, my mother's like that. I'm like that a lot.
Me too. We all are. So just something like that is a cool...
Duncan didn't describe meditation as simply sitting in silence. He framed it as a deliberate act of freeing the mind, a process of untying the knots of thought that constantly pull and twist our attention in different directions. He likened the mind to a restless room filled with chatter, where thoughts compete for attention, memories popped in uninvited, and worries about the future cast shadows over the present moment. Meditation, he said, was the act of slowly opening the windows and letting that noise drift away until what remained was stillness and clarity. Theo listened intently, asking questions in his usual blend of humor and sincerity. He wanted to understand how someone could actually free their mind in a world that never seemed to stop throwing new thoughts and distractions at them. Duncan explained that it wasn't about forcefully stopping the mind from thinking. That would be like telling the ocean to stop making waves. Instead, it was about stepping back and watching those waves without getting pulled under by them. The idea struck Theo in a way that theory alone hadn't before. He began to see meditation less as an attempt to control the mind and more as a way of letting go of control. It was about creating space, a kind of inner breathing room where clarity could naturally arise. In that space, the clutter of mental noise could settle, and what was truly important could surface. Duncan went further, describing how this process connects a person to their inner consciousness. He He spoke about it as if peeling back the layers of identity, fear, and expectation to reveal something pure and steady underneath. This wasn't a mystical claim, but rather a recognition that each person has a deeper awareness, a kind of quiet observer that exists beneath the constant flow of thoughts. Meditation, in his words, was one of the most direct ways to reconnect with that part of ourselves. Theo seemed particularly drawn to this part of the discussion, the idea that there was something inside him, something constant and unshaken, felt both comforting and intriguing. It was a concept that ran counter to the chaos of daily life, where emotions could swing wildly and circumstances could change without warning. The possibility that there was an inner anchor, accessible through stillness, made meditation feel less like a distant spiritual ritual and more like a practical tool. Duncan shared that this connection to inner consciousness could have subtle but profound effects. It can make life feel less reactive, less dictated by fleeting emotional or external chaos. It can give someone a sense of grounding even in turbulent times. And it can foster a kind of quiet joy, not the loud, fleeting rush of excitement, but a steady contentment that hums in the background of daily life. As they spoke, Theo began relating it to his own experiences, those rare times in life when everything seemed to slow down, when a sense of peace or clarity appeared unexpectedly. Moments on long drives, watching the landscape roll by, moments after prayer, when worries felt a little lighter, times when laughter with friends made the rest of the world fade away. He began to see how meditation could be a way of intentionally cultivating that same state instead of waiting for it to arrive by accident. The conversation lingered there, balancing between the philosophical and the personal. Leo asked practical questions. How long should someone meditate? How often? And what if they get restless? Duncan answered with patience, reinforcing that the practice wasn't about perfection. Even a few minutes of stillness could have value. The goal wasn't to master some ideal form of meditation, but to keep showing up for it, allowing the benefits to unfold over time. By the end of the exchange, Theo seemed to have crossed an invisible threshold in understanding. Meditation no longer felt like an inaccessible practice reserved for monks or people with perfectly calm lives. It felt like something that he could do, something that could give him access to the clarity and steadiness Duncan described. The exchange began with a caller's voice coming through, carrying a question that was simple on the surface, but touched on something deeply personal. They had noticed that Theo Von often used the phrase higher power when talking about faith or spiritual matters, and they wondered why he didn't just say God outright. There was a hint of curiosity in the question, but also a suggestion: was he avoiding the word? Was it because he didn't truly believe, or perhaps because he was hesitant to be associated with religion in such a direct way?
Here watching this past weekend at my house, and I was just curious. You give a lot of credit to your higher power, and to be honest, you sound like, the way you talk, you sound like you believe in Jesus, or you believe in God. So I was just wondering, how come you don't say God whenever you say your higher power? Or do you just not believe in necessarily God and that there is just a higher power? Anyways, man, keep doing you. Gang, gang, brother. Love you.
Gang, gang, bro. Love you back, playboy. Sometimes I say higher power. My God isn't like a real name maniac. Some gods is a real name maniac, Call me this, call me that, call me Henry, But, I believe in God, man. And I know some people don't. That's fine with me. I think God is a personal choice. And for me, I think I need a God. I don't do the best job of believing in him sometimes. I know a lot of times I do my own will, but I just think it's taking a chance, man. It's taking a chance to believe in God.
Theo took a moment before answering, the pause giving weight to what he was about to say. When he spoke, his tone was calm but certain. He explained that he was, in fact, a Christian. His belief in God wasn't something distant or half-hearted. It was real, personal, and woven into the way he saw the world. Using the phrase higher power wasn't about hiding from that truth or diluting it. Rather, it was a way of speaking that could include people from all walks of life, even those who might not share his exact beliefs, but still felt drawn to the idea of something greater than themselves. He made it clear that he wasn't ashamed of the name of God. There was no embarrassment in his faith, no fear of how it might be received. In fact, he was thankful for it. To him, acknowledging God was as natural as breathing. But he also understood that the language around faith can be a sensitive thing for people, especially in a world where religion often becomes a dividing line. Higher power was a bridge, a way of opening the door to conversation about spirituality, without people feeling they were forced into a specific religious framework right away. As he spoke, there was a sincerity in his voice that softened the question entirely. The conversation shifted from a possible critique to a moment of shared understanding. Listeners could hear that his choice of words wasn't about evasion. It was about compassion, empathy, and an awareness of how to reach people where they are. He believed in meeting others on common ground, even when that ground didn't yet have a cross planted in the middle of it. It was also a reflection of his own journey. He knew that for many, faith wasn't an instant leap. It was a slow walk towards something they could trust. In his own life, the path to deep belief had been shaped by experiences, doubts, and moments of unexpected grace. Higher power could be the starting point for someone else's journey, just as certain words and ideas had once been starting points for him. The moment felt heartwarming because it wasn't defensive. There was no attempt to argue or convince through force of logic. Instead, it was simply a man speaking openly about what he believed and why he sometimes framed it in broader terms. It was honest without being confrontational and grounded without being rigid. By the time he finished answering, the caller's question had been addressed, but something more had been given, a glimpse into how faith can be both firm and gentle, unwavering yet inclusive. It was the kind of response that didn't just clarify his position. It quietly encouraged others to think about their own beliefs, their own words, and the bridges they might build when talking about something as profound as God. Theo Von has always had a knack for weaving humor into deep, sometimes uncomfortable conversations. And one of his more thought-provoking moments came when he reflected on faith, particularly Christianity, in the context of modern life in Los Angeles. In his trademark Southern drawl and laid-back storytelling style, Theo opened up about the shifting cultural atmosphere he's observed since moving from the Bible Belt to the West Coast. For Theo, faith, especially Christian faith, wasn't just a personal belief system. It was the cultural backdrop of his upbringing. In small-town Louisiana, church wasn't merely a Sunday ritual. It was a community hub. It was where neighbors met, where people brought casseroles to comfort grieving families, and where a shared moral framework quietly influenced how people treated one another. There was a kind of social glue in that shared belief, even if everybody didn't agree on theology.
In Los Angeles, in some of this industry and stuff that I'm in, it's not a rejection against Christ, but there's definitely, religion isn't super welcome. People want to be offended, or people want, there's this vibe out here sometimes I feel like you're going to offend.
But in Los Angeles, Theo has noticed something different. There's a certain guardedness, sometimes outright hostility, toward open expressions of Christianity. He's pointed out how, in some circles, mentioning your faith can suddenly change the tone of a conversation. People become defensive or even offended, as if the mere acknowledgement of religious belief is an intrusion into their personal freedom. To Theo, this is a sharp contrast to the culture he grew up in, where speaking about God or quoting scripture wasn't seen as pushing an agenda. It was just part of everyday conversation. Theo talks about the irony of the shift. Los Angeles prides itself on being a place of openness and diversity, yet faith, particularly Christian faith, often seems to be the one identity treated with suspicion. He finds it strange that people can publicly express almost any worldview, spiritual or otherwise. But if someone talks openly about Jesus or quotes the Bible, they risk being labeled as judgmental or out of touch. He also noticed the way people in LA sometimes frame religion, especially Christianity, in terms of stereotypes, assuming that all believers are rigid, politically motivated, or unwilling to engage with other perspectives. For Theo, that's an oversimplification. He argues that many people of faith, himself included, wrestle with questions and doubts, and that belief isn't always about having rigid answers, but about trying to navigate life with a sense of purpose and humility.
But man, I feel like faith is just such a healing thing for people. Yeah, I feel alone. I feel hitchhiking when if I don't have some kind of a faith. And as I even talk about this, I realize that my faith isn't very strong right now, and that it can really be tightened up. And but yeah, to feel, having faith, that's a free parent. You get a free parent. I'm not thinking I'm out here in this world, this is all for me, this is all on my back, that I have no point, that I don't have an umbilical cord to some sort of being. Now, Jesus Christ, man, that was the most...
There's also a cultural difference on how religious gatherings are perceived. Back home, a church service was considered an open invitation. Come in, even if you don't believe, and you'll be welcomed with coffee and conversation. In LA, Theo quotes, "Religion is sometimes treated as a private hobby, something to keep to yourself, like an eccentric pastime that might offend someone if discussed too openly." Theo sees this as a part of a broader societal trend where people are quick to take offense at the mere expression of values they don't share. In his view, the problem isn't disagreement, it's the reflex to shut down conversation before it even begins. For him, faith should be something people can talk about honestly, whether they share it or not, without fear or ridicule or instant dismissal. Ultimately, Theo's reflections aren't about preaching or converting anyone. They're about noticing the changing ways we relate to belief in public spaces. He believes that being able to talk about faith openly, not aggressively, but with genuine curiosity, creates opportunities for connection in a city where so many feel isolated. Whether someone's a believer or not, Theo argues there's value in keeping that conversation alive. Because for him, the story of faith in Los Angeles isn't just about religion. It's about whether we can still sit across from someone, hear their truth, and not feel threatened by it. During a quieter, more relaxed exchange with Bobby Lee, the conversation drifted into one of those odd but fascinating observations that Theo Von is known for. It wasn't high-energy banter, rapid-fire jokes, just two people circling around an idea with curiosity. The tone felt unhurried, as if they had all the time in the world to peel back the layers of a thought. Theo began describing something he's noticed over the years in certain church settings, especially in the South where he grew up. Among groups of devout male Christians, there's a particular emotional presence he picks up on, something he jokingly labels as gay vibes, but not in the literal or sexual sense. It's more about an energy, a softness, an emotional openness that isn't always associated with traditional masculinity.
Not gay if you love Jesus and you're a man.
What?
Because there's a part of you that's loving another man.
Right. There is a gay vibe.
In his mind, this feeling comes from the way these men express their devotion. It's not casual belief or distant respect. It's love, real love, directed toward Jesus Christ. And since Jesus is, in human form, a man, that devotion takes on a unique tone. It's an intense bond, deeply personal, expressed in ways that men in everyday life rarely allow themselves to show toward other men. He paints a picture from memory, scenes in small-town churches where rough-handed farmers or stoic middle-aged fathers would suddenly break down in tears during worship. Moments where a deacon's voice would waver as he spoke about his faith, and when a man in the pews would close his eyes and sing with a trembling in his chest that seemed to carry more than just the melody. These moments are raw, unguarded, and brimming with a kind of tenderness that's rare to see among men in secular spaces. The conversation with Bobby leans into the contrast. In most male relationships, emotion is tightly rationed. Affection is filtered through humor, competition, or shared activities, and rarely spoken aloud. Yet in church, these barriers seem to dissolve. A man can pour his heart out toward Jesus without fear of mockery or judgment. He can proclaim love, devotion, even longing in a way that feels safe within that sacred context. Theo's framing of it as gay vibes is less about mockery and more about his inability to find a better shorthand for that emotional dynamic. It's his way of naming the intimacy he sees, an intimacy that outside the church would be interpreted very differently. The conversation turns toward how religion creates a rare space for vulnerability. It gives men permission to speak the kind of words and display the kind of tenderness they never direct toward another living man. There's also a recognition of the beauty in it. Beneath the playful label, there's a fascination with how faith can unlock this deep emotional well. In everyday culture, especially among men raised in environments where toughness is prized, showing such open affection toward another man would be unthinkable. But here, the figure of Jesus, divine, revered, and safely distant in time, becomes the one male presence they can unabashedly love. Bobby reacts with a mix of amusement and understanding, recognizing the truth in what's being described. The conversation doesn't aim to dismantle the faith or ridicule its followers. Instead, it acknowledges the strangeness and the humanity in it, the way devotion bends the usual rules of how men relate to each other. By the end, the idea has been turned over enough to show both its humorous side and its profound one. It's the kind of observation that lingers, a small, peculiar truth about the human experience, tucked inside a casual, meandering talk between two friends. In this episode, Theo Von opens up in a rare, heartfelt way about his personal faith and what it means to him. He talks about believing in God, not as a distant concept or an abstract philosophy, but as a deeply personal relationship, one where he genuinely feels that God has his back. For Theo, this belief isn't just a cultural inheritance or a family tradition. It's something that actively shapes the way he approaches life, the way he processes challenges, and the way he finds comfort when things feel overwhelming. He describes faith as a very healing thing, highlighting how it works almost like a steady anchor in a turbulent world. Life throws curveballs, loss, disappointment, confusion, betrayal, and for him, knowing that there's a higher power looking out for him offers a kind of reassurance that's hard to find elsewhere. It's not about avoiding problems, but about carrying a quiet confidence that he wouldn't have to face them alone. The comfort comes not just from the idea of divine protection, but also from the sense of being known with faults, flaws, and all by a God who still chooses to care for him.
Shoulder had been dislocated, and he popped it back in the dressing room, got back out there in the ring, and it popped out again, and it had really popped out bad this time. So we flew him back to Texas to get surgery.
However, Theo is candid about something many people of faith can relate to, the struggle to maintain the level of devotion he feels he should have. He admits that his faith could be tighter. It's not as strong as he wants it to be, and that gap between where he is and where he hopes to be is something he notices. This kind of honesty is refreshing because it removes the illusion that faith is always unwavering or perfect. Instead, he paints a picture of faith as something that can ebb and flow, something strong and confident, other times riddled with questions and distance. For Theo, this isn't a reason to abandon belief, but a reason to keep working at it. Faith, in his view, isn't a static possession. It's something you nurture, like a relationship that needs constant attention. He seems to understand that growth in faith doesn't happen overnight, and it doesn't mean you won't have doubts. It's more about showing up, being honest with yourself and with God, and trying to build that trust day by day. He also touches on the deeply personal nature of belief, how it's not always easy to talk about publicly, especially in environments or communities where religious faith can be met with skepticism or even ridicule. Still, for him, the healing and grounding he finds in his belief outweighs the risk of vulnerability. He sees God as a stabilizing force, and in cities like Los Angeles, known for its chaos, ambition, and constant reinvention, that stability is precious. Ultimately, Theo's reflections reveal faith as both a comfort and a challenge. It's something that gives him strength, but also something he feels responsible for deepening. In acknowledging that his faith isn't as strong as he wants it to be, he's not showing weakness. He's showing the humility and self-awareness that often leads to genuine spiritual growth. For Theo, belief in God isn't about perfection. It's about connection, healing, and the ongoing journey toward trust. In this particular episode, Theo Von opens up in a way that feels deeply personal and unguarded. It's one of those rare moments where his usual wit and offbeat humor gives way to raw sincerity. Sitting back in his chair, his tone slows down, his voice carrying the weight of someone speaking from lived experience. He begins to unpack what faith means to him, not as a doctrine, not as a rule book, but as something far more intimate and freeing.
But man, I feel like faith is just such a healing thing for people. Yeah, I feel alone. I feel hitchhiking when if I don't have some kind of a faith. And I, as I even talk about this, I realize that my faith isn't very strong right now, and that it can really be tightened up. And but yeah, to feel, having faith, that's a free parent. You get a free parent. I'm not thinking I'm out here in this world, this is all for me, this is all on my back, that I have no point, that I don't have an umbilical cord to some sort of being. Now, Jesus Christ, man, that was the most popular guy in my area growing up. I think the dude is a great role model. I think he could be the Son of God. I think his brother could be, who's the little chubby guy, that positive baby, that little fruit, that bad boy eating fruits in the diaper. Buddha. Maybe Buddha's his brother, and Mother Nature is their sister, and Yin and Yang are their Asian cousins. And you got this one big beautiful family of people that when we feel alone, we don't have to. Or when we feel like we're not part of something, that we don't have to. I can't. And look, I know some people out there are atheists and stuff, and they don't want to believe in anything, and that's, and I can't understand it. But I also come from a place where I think I've felt alone a lot. And so if you're telling me that there is there's a free being, a free body, a free parent, a free love, a free heart out there in the universe that will help me not feel alone, man, come on. That's a lottery ticket that I don't have to scratch, man. I'll take that all day.
He likens faith to a free parent. It's an image that's simple yet profound. A free parent, in his view, is one who loves you unconditionally, but doesn't keep you tethered. One who lets you go out into the world, stumble, learn, and return on your own terms. Theo explains that his relationship with God isn't about being bound by an unbreakable cord, like an umbilical link that keeps you dependent and unable to explore. Instead, it's about knowing that there's a steady, loving presence watching over you, even when you wander far away. This metaphor strikes at the heart of how Theo processes spirituality. He doesn't talk about faith as a constant leash pulling you back, nor as a system of strict controls. Rather, it's about having the assurance that no matter where you roam, there's someone, some being that has your back. In his mind, that's where the healing power of belief comes from. It's not the rigidity of always being connected in a physical sense, but the freedom to move, to falter, to return. From there, Theo reflects on the alternative life without faith. He uses another vivid image, hitchhiking through life. He says that without faith, without that guiding presence, you'd just be standing on the side of the road with your thumb out, hoping someone will pick you up and take you somewhere worthwhile. You're at the mercy of chance, of strangers, of unpredictable winds. He's not necessarily condemning those who live without faith, but for him, personally, that kind of existence feels directionless and unsafe. Faith, in contrast, is like having your own trusted ride, someone who knows the road ahead, who's been there before, and who's not going to leave you stranded. As he speaks, there's a gentle honesty in how he admits that his faith isn't as strong as he wants it to be. This isn't a sermon from someone who claims to have it all figured out. It's a confession from a man who knows he's still searching, still working on building that trust. He doesn't posture or pretend. He lays it bare that sometimes his grip on faith loosens, that doubt creeps in. And yet, even in those moments, the free parent image gives him comfort. God doesn't force him to stay connected. He allows the space to question, to wander, and then, eventually, to return. The moment feels tender because it bridges both vulnerability and resilience. Theo's analogy resonates with people who've wrestled with faith, who felt both close to God and far away. It captures that paradox of spiritual life, the freedom to leave and the love that remains when you do. In the end, his words aren't just about religion. They're about the human need for an anchor, for a sense of home. For Theo, faith is that home. It's the place you can always come back to, no matter how far you've drifted, and the reason you're never truly alone on the road. Theo Von's conversation with Jim Gaffigan took a deeply personal and an unexpectedly emotional turn when he began speaking about one of the most transformative experiences of his life, forming a connection with God. For Theo, this wasn't something that happened in a flash of lightning or during some dramatic cinematic movement. It was more like slowly tending to a seed, giving it light, water, and patience until it sprouted into something living and strong. He described it as one of the best things he had ever experienced, even though in some circles, people dismissed it as voodoo or looked at him sideways for talking about it. The way Theo framed it, his connection to God wasn't just about following a set of religious rules or memorizing scripture. It was about relationship, a deeply personal and organic link to something higher than himself. In the early days, it wasn't easy. He admitted that, like any relationship worth having, it required attention and nurturing. There were days when doubt crept in, times when he didn't know if what he felt was real or just in his head. But he kept showing up. He prayed, he reflected, and he sought to understand God not as some distant authoritarian figure, but as a presence that would walk beside him in his everyday struggles.
Kind of stuff. I mean, one of the best times I ever had in my life, or best I ever felt, was when I felt like I had a really strong connection to a higher power.
Yeah.
And I'd worked on it a lot, and it really came to fruition. And even if some people say, well, that's voodoo, whatever it is, doesn't matter. It worked. It worked as much as it was real, as far as I knew. And if that's the truth to me, then that's great.
Well,
What made this journey special to Theo was how gradual and rewarding it was. He compared it to tending a garden. You don't plant a seed and wake up the next morning expecting a full tree. You put in the time. You keep faith even when you see no immediate signs of growth. And eventually, the roots take hold. For Theo, the fruition came in moments where life's chaos felt less overwhelming, where he could sense a guiding hand, and where he had a deeper sense of purpose. That was when he knew the connection was real. He acknowledged that some people, perhaps especially in the comedy world, might scoff at the idea of a comedian talking openly about faith. The voodoo comment came from a place of misunderstanding, he felt. Faith, in his experience, wasn't about superstition or blind belief. It was about grounding himself in something more stable than his own fleeting emotions or life's unpredictable circumstances. And when he found that grounding, it didn't make his life perfect, but it gave him a compass. As he spoke, there was a gentleness in his tone, as if he was aware of how personal and vulnerable the topic was. He wasn't trying to preach to Jim Gaffigan or to anyone listening. Instead, he shared it like someone might talk about a favorite memory or a dear friend, something that had shaped him in quiet but profound ways. It was less about telling people what they should believe and more about showing what had worked for him, how it had steadied him when the road felt uncertain. By the end of the moment, it was clear that this wasn't just a story for Theo. It was a lived reality. Forming that connection to God had been like finding an anchor in the middle of a storm, a steady point to hold on to when everything else felt adrift. And the fact that he nurtured it patiently through doubt and difficulty only made the eventual growth more meaningful. For him, it wasn't voodoo. It was the most real thing he had ever experienced. It was a moment that carried more weight than the usual light-hearted tone of conversation. Theo Von began speaking about a chapter in his life when things had spiraled into a deep, shadowed valley. It wasn't just one setback, it was a chain of blows, each one hitting before the last had healed. A relationship he had hoped would last came apart, leaving behind an ache that wasn't only about love lost, but also about trust shaken and a vision of the future collapsing in on itself. Around the same time, other areas of life seemed to crumble, personal struggles, disappointments, and the slow erosion of confidence that comes when bad news stops feeling surprising.
I was just broken down, man. I was really banged up about a relationship and just not sure what I wanted to do with my life. I'd moved back in with my step parents, and man, I remember one time I was just on my knees bawling, and I just felt something come around my heart, man. I can't even explain it.
He described that stretch of time as if the world had dulled, as though each day was a slow trudge with no clear point ahead. The usual distractions and coping mechanisms he might have turned to in the past didn't seem to work anymore. Socializing felt empty, work felt pointless, and even creative outlets, which had always been a refuge, offered little relief. It was a period defined not just by sadness, but by a sense of disconnection from others, from himself, from any source of hope. It was in that low place that he began to do something he hadn't leaned on in years: pray. At first, it wasn't with grand expectation. The prayers were simple, almost hesitant, like tapping on a door without knowing if anyone was on the other side. But over time, the act of speaking, of admitting weakness, asking for help, or even just unloading thoughts into the quiet started to feel different. The prayers grew less like sending words into emptiness and more like real conversations with someone who was actually listening. In those moments, began to sense something shift. The heaviness was still there, but it was joined by a warmth that hadn't been present before. It wasn't a sudden removal of problems or a miraculous overnight transformation. Instead, it was a steady, almost invisible presence, something that wrapped around the fear and sadness like a shield. He began to feel surrounded, not by circumstances, by something deeper, the love of God. The love didn't erase the pain, but it reframed it. The failures and losses stopped feeling like evidence that he was alone or forgotten. Instead, they became part of a bigger picture, one he couldn't fully see yet, but could trust had meaning. The prayers no longer felt like desperate shouts in the dark. They felt like part of a relationship, one that gave him grounding when nothing else did. In time, this spiritual connection began to restore pieces of himself that he thought were gone. He felt more willing to face each day, more capable of forgiving himself for past mistakes, and more open to forgiving others. The bitterness that had started to take root was slowly replaced with a quieter kind of resilience. There was still grief over what had been lost, but it no longer consumed him. The period remained one of the darkest in his memory, but it was also the point where he discovered something unshakable. It wasn't that life stopped being hard. It was that he had found a source of strength that didn't depend on circumstances. Surrounded by that love, he began to walk forward again, carrying not just the lessons of loss, but also the certainty that he was not walking alone. On this podcast, Theo Von invited Neil deGrasse Tyson for a thoughtful and nuanced discussion about some of the more challenging concepts tied to religion and belief systems, specifically the ideas of the devil, hell, and divine justice. The conversation stood out because it combined Theo's natural curiosity and humor with Neil's scientific perspective, creating a space where a big question could be explored without judgment or the need for definitive answers.
Could fulfill that. No one can live up to that, which is why, here's another one, in the spirit of your earlier comment. Here's another one. Oh, you got sick and this person didn't. God is punishing you. You did something against God in the last 2 weeks. Yeah, you were touching your privates, all right? Yeah. Well, whatever. I mean, we all do stuff.
Oh, I do.
and it's easy to find it and say, oh my gosh, I must be punished for that.
God.
And when that happens, then blame starts getting handed out. So here, I got another one. Consider that Muslims, it's part of the rituals of being a Muslim is you're cleaning your hands and your feet. And your ears and your nose, and there's an ablution, whatever the word is, where there's a cleansing daily.
Wow,
daily. Okay,
that's a good idea. My grandmother, I think, was Muslim then.
Well, just think about this. Back then, nobody's showering every day. But some funky times. Okay, all right. There's some people don't shower every day today, but you could. And United States, we probably take more showers than anybody else in the world from the research I've done on that. But point is, if a disease comes through and it comes from contact or some other thing because you're dirty, you get sick and the Muslims don't.
Oh, so they seem powerful.
Oh my gosh. And you're Christian and they're Muslims? You're saying...
Neil shared his personal stance. He does not believe in the existence of the devil or hell as literal entities. For him, these ideas often serve symbolic or moral purposes in many religious traditions, but they don't align with the scientific understanding of the universe or human experience. This perspective opened the door for Theo to reflect on how these concepts function in various religions, where misfortune or suffering is sometimes framed as a form of justice, an act by a higher power responding to the moral balance between good and evil. They talked about how, in many traditions, the hardships people face are not random, but carry meaning. They can be interpreted as consequences for wrongdoing or test of faith. This worldview can serve as a powerful motivator for ethical behavior, encouraging people to align their actions with moral standards in the hope of avoiding divine punishment or earning favor. Yet, it also raises difficult questions. If suffering is always deserved, what about the innocent or those who face tragedy without apparent cause? How do these beliefs reconcile with the idea of a loving, compassionate deity? Neil pointed out that seeing misfortune as divine retribution can be problematic from a scientific or philosophical perspective. It tends to oversimplify the complexities of life and natural events, which often result from countless factors, biological, environmental, social, that don't necessarily align with moral cause and effect. Meanwhile, Theo explored how deeply these beliefs are ingrained in culture and human psychology, providing people with frameworks to make sense of chaos and injustice. They also touched on the role these concepts play in community and identity. The idea of hell and the devil can act as cautionary tales, tools for social cohesion, or explanations that help people cope with the unknown. In this way, the stories serve purpose beyond literal truth. They shape behavior, comfort the fearful, and create a sense of order in an unpredictable world. Yet, beneath all the theological and philosophical debate, both Theo and Neil seem to agree on a broader human desire to find meaning in life's hardships and to seek justice, whether in this world or beyond. The discussion wasn't about disproving faith or belief, but about understanding how these ideas function in human experience and how they can be reconciled with a modern understanding of reality. Ultimately, the conversation reflected a balance between skepticism and respect, acknowledging the power of religious narratives while also recognizing the importance of questioning and expanding our understanding. It showed how, even without belief in literal devils or hells, people continue to wrestle with concepts of good and evil, justice and suffering, and the profound mystery of why bad things happen. For Theo, this discussion was a way of peeling back layers not to undermine anyone's faith, but to explore the interactions between belief, culture, and knowledge. For Neil, it was an opportunity to share how scientific inquiry can coexist with spiritual questions, inviting curiosity rather than dismissal. In the end, the conversation left listeners with more questions than answers, but maybe that's the point. Some of the most meaningful discussions happen in the space between certainty and doubt, where ideas challenge us to think more deeply about what it means to be human, to suffer, and to hope. During an amazing episode with a rabbi, Theo Von's conversation with the rabbi moved into deeper territory when the subject of anti-Semitism came up. The exchange was framed by an earlier point the rabbi made about Jewish literacy and complexity as a culture. He explained that this wasn't accidental. It stemmed from the very origins of Judaism itself. The Torah, the central symbol and guiding text of the Jewish faith, is not an object of stone or gold, but a book. From the very start, Jewish identity was built around reading, study, interpretation, and a deep engagement with language.
A perfect life in Judaism, we have a perfect book. That makes it different. So you have to know, like literacy.
Text-based.
Literacy was huge. And then the other thing is, when you have to wander from place to place to place, you have to start learning all sorts of different cultural cues or you won't make it. And so you have to be like intellectually agile, because if you're not, the host country is not going to have any use for you and they're not going to be able to use you.
Wow.
So both those things Jews learned, and that's why you have so many Jews in comedy and so many Jews in music and so many Jews in literature. And so they learned the cultural cues of wherever they had to wander, which is, you know, good and bad.
This meant for Jews to remain true to their faith, they needed to be literate. It wasn't enough to simply follow rituals. They had to understand their laws, their history, their ethics, and their relationship with God through text. Over centuries, in every society they lived in, this literacy became not just a religious skill, but a practical one. Wherever Jewish communities settled, they often took roles that required precision and adaptability. But this cultural distinctiveness, while it brought value to societies, also made Jews stand out. And in societies where differences can be seen as a threat, standing out was dangerous. This is where the rabbi pointed out that anti-Semitism isn't a recent phenomenon or even a product of modern politics. It's one of the oldest hatreds in human history. He traced it back to the earliest interactions between Judaism and other religions, especially Christianity. The historical tension began as Christianity emerged from Jewish roots. Early Christians sought to define their faith as something distinct from Judaism. This often involved reinterpreting the Jewish scriptures and positioning their own beliefs as a fulfillment or a replacement of Jewish tradition. In that process, Jews were sometimes portrayed as resistant, stubborn, or even spiritually flawed for not accepting the new faith. Over centuries, these theological differences hardened into stereotypes, and religious leaders and rulers often used these ideas to justify exclusion, persecution, and scapegoating. This was compounded by the fact that Jews, being literate and often involved in commerce, were in positions that made them easy targets during times of crisis. If an economy collapses, they could be blamed for hoarding wealth. If a plague struck, their separateness could be twisted into accusations of poisoning wells. The fact that Jewish communities maintained their own languages, customs, and religious laws, all anchored in their study of the Torah, only reinforced their image as outsiders in predominantly Christian or Muslim lands. The oldest hatred label comes from the fact that anti-Semitism persisted through centuries of changing empires, ideologies, and political systems. Unlike other prejudices that faded as certain groups assimilated or as societies evolved, anti-Semitism adapted to new eras. In medieval Europe, it was fueled by religious narratives. In the Enlightenment, when religion lost some of its grip, anti-Semitism shifted to economic or racial theories. In the modern era, it became political, culminating in the horrors of the Holocaust. Yet, even after such devastation, anti-Semitic ideas have continued to resurface in different forms across the world.
Judaism was first by a couple thousand years.
Oh, damn. Then they probably were then.
Yeah. And that's why Jesus was born Jewish. Saul.
Oh, he was Jewish.
Turned to Paul. Paul's original name was Saul.
Oh, really?
Yes. He was Jewish. And what happened was the believers in Jesus were all Jews. The early disciples were all Jews. And the other Jews disagreed with them. And I don't know about you, but in my experience, family fights are sometimes the worst fights. Yeah. And this was a family fight. It was like they all knew each other. They all grew together. It was a very small...
In that moment with Theo Von, the rabbi's point was not just historical, but personal. The literacy and complexity he described were sources of pride for the Jewish people, a cultural survival mechanism that allowed them to thrive despite centuries of exile, migration, and discrimination. But they were also part of what made Jews visible in ways that provoked suspicion or envy. The discussion served as a reminder that anti-Semitism isn't about one misunderstanding or one political conflict. It's a deeply rooted pattern of othering, stretching back to the very beginnings of religious divergence. The fact that it has endured so long, through so many societal shifts, makes it one of the most persistent and insidious forms of prejudice humanity has ever known. Well, thanks for winding down with some of the craziest and most heartfelt discussions from the mind of Theo Von and his guests. If you enjoy this bedtime dive into Theo's world, be sure to like, subscribe, and share, because everyone deserves a weird story to fall asleep to. I'm Mickey V. Good night.